The factor of safety of the core is in fact 3-to-1 with the actual in-service loads on it, and the perimeter columns 5-to-1. Yet NIST shows a factor of safety in the core of somewhere around 1.92 to 2-to-1, and that's erroneous. It's actually higher than that. What they were doing here was trying to show, I believe, trying to show that the buildings would be more susceptible to failure than they actually were. NIST admits that only 1/4 to 0.5% of the steel from the towers was safe for analysis. Dr. John Gross, one of the project leaders, has admitted being in the yards, picking pieces safe for analysis, but the report doesn't explain why so little was saved. Interestingly, when the steel that was safe in the towers did not show it experienced high temperatures, the report was dismissive. They were saying that sample size was not sufficient to be representative. Well, it would seem that Dr. Gross would have been involved in determining what to save and what not to. Why wouldn't a sufficient sample size be saved? And why wasn't, at the very least, all the steel from the impact and fire-affected areas salvaged for analysis? Nobody does a forensic analysis in this matter. You always save for physical evidence. The amount of space required to store this amount of material would not have been significant relative to the issue to be resolved. This does not explain the yellow-orange fluorescing molten metal that was observed coming out of the damaged northeast corner of the South Tower on the opposite side of the aircraft hit. In a frequently asked questions point, they claimed that it could have been aluminum. But this was tested by Dr. Stephen Jones. He melted aluminum, and this had claimed that it could have been fluorescing orange-yellow because of organics that would have mixed in with it, rugs, drapery, things like that. So Dr. Jones did that, and it turns out that these organics simply float to the top. They don't mix with the molten aluminum. Molten aluminum fluoresces silvery gray, not orange-yellow. The orange-yellow had to be iron and or steel. So they haven't explained that, and the significance here is that the maximum temperatures which can be achieved by diffuse flame hydrocarbon or office fires is about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, and that can be proven. This is well below the 2,750 degree Fahrenheit melting temperature of steel. There's been no further response from NIST on this issue. NIST has acknowledged in their final report on World Trade Center 7 now that the building fell at full free-fall acceleration for 2.25 seconds. During this time, in a free fall, that building would have fallen at least 80 feet in full free fall. And that's over 6 stories. Yet there's no attempt in the report to confront the implications of this. The fall is dramatic, and the whole building completely comes down in one continuous motion. There couldn't have been any structural resistance during this 6-story fall. It's completely impossible. And NIST themselves have to recognize the implications of this. The fact that they haven't is fraudulent. The exterior of the NIST World Trade Center 7 computer simulation model, which they put together to try to explain their theory, shows large, very large deformations which are not observed in the video of the actual event. Yet they don't attempt to explain this in the report on why their model doesn't represent or replicate reality. Usually models, computer models in engineering have to represent or replicate the real event. So the fact that it doesn't shows that it's not indicative of what actually happened. What actually happened was the exterior of the building comes down fully, symmetrically, and at one time. Both sides of the building come down completely and in a total free fall acceleration for over 2 seconds. This is fully indicative of full structural support being removed for at least 6 stories. That could not happen by fire. What's actually happening with the NIST computer model, it's behaving like a natural collapse would. It would be deforming the exterior of the building if the whole interior was collapsing prior to the exterior. What we're seeing is what would happen in a natural collapse, and what we see on the real video is not a natural collapse. In this World Trade Center 7 report presentation in August of 2008, and in their April 21st, 2009, frequently asked questions, they state that they have investigated whether World Trade Center 7 could have been brought down by controlled demolition, and that they have concluded it was not. They state this, although they admit they did not test for explosive residues in the rubble or dust of any of the 3 collapsed buildings. They also admit that no steel whatsoever was saved from World Trade Center 7 for analysis. Their conclusions are based on the claim that there were no sound levels measured which they feel would be indicative of the size of an explosion needed to destroy the column that they say collapsed initially in World Trade Center 7, column 79, which is on the northeast corner of the core in that building. And they say that rigging the building in an undetected way would be difficult. They also dismissed the use of incendiaries based on the amount of it needed to destabilize column 79 and alleged it would be difficult to bring in the building undetected. In contrast to their argument that it would be difficult to rig World Trade Center 7 without being detected, many people are aware, although many would not be aware, that there was a secret retrofit of the Citibank Tower in New York City itself in 1978. Apparently there was an engineering error which could have allowed the building to topple in 70-mile-per-hour winds on the structural frame. In that case, secrecy was maintained after the problem was realized, and the repairs were made at night, all during the summer and into the fall of 1978. They didn't want the building occupants and nearby residents to panic when there was actually no danger, and an evacuation plan for the building was drawn up with the intent to implement if high winds were imminent. So here we had a large skyscraper retrofitted in secret in New York City in 1978, and it wasn't made public until many years later. So that sort of refutes this claim that it would be difficult to bring these things into the building. That was done before and it's known. This claims that the reason column 79 collapsed was that the girder attached to it and to the northeast wall was pushed by beams from the east side, and it walked off its seat on column 79. What would have prevented this is shear studs that are attached to the top of the beam and up into the concrete. However, even though in their earlier draft report NIST said that there were shear studs on the girders and the beams outside of the core, they're now claiming they weren't on the girders outside the core. This is a change in what they're saying, and it has to create suspicion. It doesn't make sense that there would be no shear studs on both the girders and the beams, as that's standard practice in the industry. A Freedom of Information Act request to NIST by a registered structural engineer for calculations and analysis substantiating the walk-off failures of the horizontal girders from their seats at columns 79 and 81 was denied by NIST, with the claim that releasing this data might jeopardize public safety. That's simply incredible. How could it possibly jeopardize public safety to tell people in the industry, engineers who were responsible for designing these buildings, how this failure could occur? And they refused to release their analysis and calculations, which makes engineers wonder if they actually have something to substantiate it. It needs to be mentioned that NIST has also repeatedly refused to release computer input data that was requested through the Freedom of Information Act from them in the past concerning World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7. Another very interesting point is that FEMA, in their report, there was apparently one piece of steel saved from World Trade Center 7, and the scientists who examined it said that there was rapid oxidation, sulfidation, and intergranular melting at a melting point much lower than what could happen with steel, which indicates there was eutectic involved, which is a chemical mixture designed to make a substance melt at a lower point. And sulfur does that when it's added to thermite. This was not included, NIST did not pick up on this, even though the scientists involved in the FEMA report recommended future studies on this. NIST did not pick up on this and did not further this investigation. The fact that NIST did not include any discussion whatsoever about this piece that exhibited this intergranular melting, rapid oxidation, and sulfidation in their report after it had been recommended that it be looked at, that it was quite a mystery, is essentially fraudulent, and it's probably criminal. And yet that's what we have. NIST did not discuss this in the report whatsoever. Aside from this one small piece that was found to have intergranular melting, incredibly, none of the other steel from World Trade Center 7 was saved for analysis. This is disconcerting, considering World Trade Center 7 would have been the first steel-framed high-rise building in history to ostensibly collapse due to fire. Dr. John Gross was involved in the selection of the pieces of steel saved for the NIST investigations and the failures of all three buildings. In their final report in November 2008 on World Trade Center 7, NIST makes no mention of the fact that no steel was saved from World Trade Center 7 for analysis. The fire severity and durations shown in NIST reports for all three buildings don't match observation. World Trade Center 7, NIST claims the fires were very large and very hot and long-lasting, when in reality, observation, which has been researched by many people, shows these fires did not last very long. They were not in the locations where NIST claims they were at given times. In the case of the South Tower, there's even radio calls by firemen saying the fires were small and that they were easy to control, relatively easy to control. This was a few minutes before the tower actually collapsed. In spite of numerous eyewitnesses testifying to evidence that molten iron and steel was in the rubble of just the three collapsed buildings, Dr. John Gross of NIST is on video denying that there was any evidence of this and that he hasn't heard of anybody having seen it or observed it. There are firemen on video saying they observed molten iron and steel running like lava from a volcano down the channelways when you got down below in these collapsed buildings. The significance here is that maximum temperatures which can be achieved by diffuse flame hydrocarbon fires are 1800 degrees Fahrenheit and well below the 2750 degree Fahrenheit melting temperature of steel. NIST has no ability to answer this question. That's obviously why John Gross is denying its existence. NIST has now admitted that they did not test for explosives, and their Director of Public Relations is on record as saying if you're going to test for something that is not there, you're wasting your time and taxpayers' money. In the oral histories of the emergency personnel taken down in late 2001 and early 2002, there are over 100 individuals who make comments about seeing, hearing, and feeling explosions in those buildings. These oral histories were documented well before NIST started their World Trade Center investigation in September 2002. This testimony should have caused the presumption that there was a good chance explosive residue would be found and justified testing for it, rather than the opposite. On what basis would NIST have presumed there was little chance of explosive residue to be found, and that it would be a waste of time and money? Neither NIST or FEMA followed standard protocol for fire and explosion investigations, or just fire investigations for that matter. National Fire Protection Association Guide number 921 calls for saving the evidence and being prepared to justify why you wouldn't. It also calls for testing for accelerants and explosives when high-order damage is involved. NIST did not do this. NIST is often responsible for generating information which the NFPA guides are written from. It makes one wonder why the NFPA standard would not be followed in this case. NIST has not answered this question publicly. I'd like to ask you to join myself and over 1,000 other architectural and engineering professionals who are demanding a new, independent, and impartial investigation with subpoena power into just exactly how these three buildings came down.